Welcome to MICE, the Massachusetts Independent Comics Expo. I'm your host, Zach Clemente, and this is Protests, Plague, and Politics panel. Before we get started, I would like to take a minute to thank our sponsor for this program, Lesley University College of Art and Design, which has hosted MICE since its inception in 2010. And I shouldn't have had that on, pardon me. Lesley Art and Design recognizes the value in exposing students, alumni, and future students, and the broader community to the varied world of contemporary comics, and considers MICE to be a critical partner in expanding the importance of visual narratives, transdisciplinary storytelling, and the role of artists and designers in society. And thanks to all of our arts advocates. These are major contributors who help sustain MICE and allow the show to grow year after year. MICE is produced by the Boston Comics Arts Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit charitable organization that funds comic art festivals, individual artists, and educational programs for the greater Boston community. If you like what we're doing here, please consider making a donation today using the donate button at the bottom of the session. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a button labeled Ask a Question. Please use that button to ask or vote any questions up that you may have throughout the session. Also, feel free to use the chat feature to say hello. Finally, we'll be streaming this panel to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/MICEXPO for any audience members who would like to use the automatic closed captioning function that Facebook Live offers. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Matt Lubchansky. They are a queer non-binary cartoonist and illustrator and the associate editor of the Ignatz Award-winning magazine and website, The Nib. Matt is a 2020 Herblock Prize winner, and they live in Queens, New York. Thank you, Matt. Please take it away.
Great. Thanks, Zach, and thank you, Mice. Hello. You just read my bio, so I'm going to skip over that. We're here to talk about how the current political and social environment have impacted the work of these lovely artists we have today and the artists themselves. The panel, we have three wonderful cartoonists whose work I'll really love. First up, Ben Passmore is the creator of Your Black Friend and Sports is Hell, and a regular contributor to the Nib. Thanks for being here, Ben. Bianca Xunise is an illustrator and cartoonist based out of Chicago, Illinois. Her work primarily focuses on the plight and daily struggles. Ooh, that's Malaka's. I think we did it in the wrong order. I'm sorry, Zach. Go to the next slide. Sorry. Her work primarily focuses on the plight and daily struggles of a young Black feminist weirdo in modern society. The winner of an Ignatz Award for Promising New Talent, Bianca's work has been featured in Vogue, Forward, Essence, Nylon, The Washington Post, the BBC, and the Nib. She's also a contributor to the book How We Fight Supremacy, a Field Guide to Black Resistance. Thanks for joining us, Bianca. And last up, we have Malaka Gharib, who is a writer, journalist, and cartoonist, the author of I Was Their American Dream, a graphic memoir about being first-generation Filipino-Egyptian American. Malaka works on NPR's Science Desk, reporting on global health and development topics such as humanitarian aid and gender and income inequality. She also writes for NPR on her experience as the child of immigrants. Her comics and zines have been published at NPR Catapult, Seventh Wave Magazine, The Nib, Savor, It's Nice That, Washington City Paper, The Believer Magazine, The New York Times, and The New Yorker. Gharib is the co-founder of the DC Art Book Fair and The Runcible Spoon, a zine about food and fantasy. I'm Malaka. Thanks everyone for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time. If you're watching, submit questions in the question asking area, which I'll be watching to see if there's anything I want to kick to the panel once we're through my questions. Great. Oh, looks like we lost Ben again. He was having some technical issues. Hopefully he will return. Cool. So first up, thanks again for being here with me. My first question is, kick it to both of you. I certainly don't think anybody here is under the impression that any of the problems facing the country or the world are new, especially the problems facing any marginalized group you can name. We can definitively say, though, that the volume has certainly been turned up on most things the last 5 to 6 years, and definitely, I would say this year. I'd love to go down the line here and have everyone introduce themselves and their work and tell me how has the recent change in the intensity of the crises facing the country and the world been reflected in your work? I'd love to hear about the conscious creative decisions you've had to make or choose not to, even. But let's start with Malaka.
Sure. Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So I think this year Usually when I work as a journalist at NPR on the science desk by day, and most of my work since January has been literally just on covering the pandemic, commissioning work about the pandemic, trying to write about the pandemic. And I also think that with the influx of information that we've been receiving about the pandemic, I felt like I wanted to deploy every kind of storytelling measure that I could use at my disposal to sort of get the information out there in a way that the public could understand. And for me, I felt like, you know what? I didn't do comics on a regular basis at NPR before, but let's give this a try. It was my editors actually who were very supportive, who were like, can you draw like a kid's guide to the coronavirus? And that ended up being a viral phenomenon, like 500,000 viewers to this piece of content, which came with a printable zine. And that just encouraged me more and made me realize that like right now, comics are like a really, really great, easy way for people to understand information and to spread the information, especially on social media. It's tangible. It can be tangible. It works really well on like Instagram and Twitter. So like, it actually encouraged me to keep doing that on the topic. So I feel like this has also been a really new turn for me in comics journalism in my professional life. As for my personal life with comics and zines, I have been really heartened by the quarantine movement. I started making quarantines at the beginning of the pandemic as a way to cope emotionally with what was happening, to take 5 minutes, take 10 minutes to create a zine and take stock of how I was feeling. And for me, that's been an incredible way to just process. So both professionally and personally, comics have been, at this point in time with the pandemic, just an incredible way to get information out there and deal.
Thank you. Bianca. I think you're muted.
There you go.
There you are. Hey.
I'm not really sure. So we're just going on about what we've been up to, or
we're going on what you've been up to. I was talking about how the short version, which I'll say again for Ben, I think dropped out, is just like, you know, everything sucks, but it's always sucked. But like, how has the change in like the intensity of how much everything sucks lately been reflected in your work and like the conscious creative decisions that you've had to make about your work?
Oh, okay, yeah. I mean, at first, I think no one except maybe, you know, some scientists probably knew that we were going to be in quarantine for 6 months now, going on 7 months. I know I didn't expect this. And I'm definitely like a doom and gloom type of person that, you know, my mom calls me Chicken Little because I always think the sky is falling. So I at first I was kind of like, I'm not gonna really participate. I'm just gonna keep making what I normally make. Because what I was afraid of was there were a lot of people doing like daily diary comics about what they were doing in quarantine. I was like, who cares? Like, we're all gonna, and I woke up and I ate cereal, and I woke up and I ate cereal. Everybody's comic's gonna be the same. And so at first I was like, I'm not gonna pay attention to that. But then you know, it started to become more than just, you know, we all thought, I mean, and this is naive, but I mean, we thought like, oh, in 2-3 weeks, you know, that we'll all go back to normal. That didn't happen. And we got to see sort of the social economical ways that coronavirus has affected different communities, especially the Black and Brown communities. And I couldn't not talk about it in my work anymore. Like it got to a point where I had to bring it up. And so famously known for the comic that came out this summer. And that was, I drew that after leaving a protest, and because I started going to the protests during the summer, and I felt like it was my social responsibility to make sure that I was talking about these things that was going to be syndicated in papers across the nation. I wanted these images and these stories to be told and to be brought into people's homes that may not normally be on Twitter. Like, sure, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, we're in our echo chambers. We think that everybody knows what's going on, but the average person who's just, they get their news from the TV or what their cousin or their niece or nephew tells them, and that's it. I wanted that to be in their home. I wanted them to I want to be forced to look at it. And then them being forced to look at it caused quite a commotion. So, which I'm happy to do.
Yeah. Great, thank you, Ben. Let's hear from you.
Yeah. Is the sound okay? I was just
man. You sound good now. You're here.
All right. I'm just in my raggedy ass kitchen now. But it's all good. Well, for me, like I think, both the sort of like the form and maybe the way I approach comics, like I don't usually try to catch whatever is current, you know what I mean? Like I'm just like always going to be behind like that. Like the work ethic isn't there. So there was that. And then also like, my biggest worry, cause like, I also probably like y'all mostly follow, other than just like random, like insurrectionist, like social media stuff. I'd follow other cartoonists. So like I saw people were putting out sort of regular things and I was like, oh, what does my day-to-day look like? And it's honestly just so on brand for like a black male anarchist, like that I became embarrassed and just like refused to make comics about like how I'm like, in my basement practicing like leg strikes. But fortunately for me, or not fortunately, but there's been a lot of really inspiring, or continues to be really inspiring, like anti-police violence, decentralized resistance movements. So for me, I think, I've thought about this quite a bit since, since the beginning of the Trump administration and sort of during it, is that like my perspective is one of like a revolutionary black person, and we've been in crisis basically since the minute we were kidnapped and brought here. So like the praxis and the history of that, there's like a continuity, and it, the geography looks different, but it's very cyclical. So for me, I think I've been just trying to write about the same things and recontextualize, like in my work, you know what I mean? And not like something that I hear a lot from like, sort of like anti-fascist individuals and groups is that part of like a fatigue that develops is one in which you're always reacting and not engaging, the conflict or whatever on your own terms. So for me, that's been sort of a mantra, like, like how, even though like we're in a constant state, like the spectacle of like terror and destruction and misery is like probably the most prominent and loudest it's ever been in my life, in my lifetime. But even within that, being like, all right, well, I should always make sure that I'm engaging in my own autonomy. So anyway, so the short answer is that lots of leg strikes in my basement and, regular nib comics, and lots of trying to read and not play video games so much.
Yeah, I could actually probably use how-to on leg strikes, because I took some like de-arresting lessons from like a former museum peace officer earlier this summer. It was very helpful, but and I was drilling, but I forgot all of them because I also am lazy. Something you could do.
Yeah. You don't need your whole affinity group for the leg strikes. You can just do that yourself. I'll come to Queens. We'll workshop it.
Yeah, I got a roof. We could head up there. And all right. So here's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, about especially since sort of like the uprisings of the summer began, was about the work one does for a living versus the work that needs to be done like in the streets. And what do you feel is the relationship between creativity, your career, and like political engagement? And do you see them as part of the same thing, or is there like a very clear line to you where one starts and one begins? Start with we can go backwards. Start with Ben.
Oh, I wasn't expecting that.
Sorry, man. If you don't want to go first.
No, I can talk forever. Who knows if it'll be substantial. How does it connect? Well, for me, like, I think that what I've been trying to do, especially in the last couple years, is have the work that I do sort of like interact with particularly certain communities of like resistance, or just like people that are sort of like interested in it. Like, something that has always concerned me is the tendency for people to produce and for viewers to seek content that seems like conclusive, things that are sort of like people are seeking sort of like a neat platform. And for me, like, particularly because the bulk of like what we would call sort of like my political experience is like in, you know, sort of scenarios like marches, you know, riots, like large, largely demoralizing, like group, you know, group organizing centers.
Sure.
So for me, it's like, so for me, something that's important is to sort of like try to make comics. Like, I just did a comic that hopefully will come out in the next couple of days. That's literally just about a conversation I had with a kid during a riot here in Philadelphia. And it's really just it's a series of questions, you know what I mean? And the conclusion is like, well, it's cool that we're here together, you know what I mean? And if that's like an end goal, that I think that's the only one I can think of, is that there's like a group struggle against like a larger existential problem. But for me, I think like the something that has always frustrated me during the Trump administration especially is this idea that we're trying to get back to some sort of like reasonable normality. And I, you know, totally understand the desire to be out of danger. But again, it's like, I feel like I'm part of a population that was in danger kind of from the beginning. So this sort of expectation that like, oh, like America, there's a kind of America that represents safety, I think feels false. So, so for me, as things happen, I feel like I just try to engage in certain additional questions, not to sound like a whole edgelord dude. That's not how I mean it, but like, you know what I mean? Like, not propose answers, but maybe like try to sort of propose sort of ideas that I see come up in my own life with my friends.
Right. Like imagining the future instead of just reacting to, like you were saying before. Bianca,
right?
Oh man, these are some loaded questions.
They said politics and plague and protest. That's heavy stuff.
Oh man, my brain's like scrambled eggs. But yeah, I mean, I guess my practice and my real life, how it's different in my comics. I mean, I feel like it's not terribly different.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm hearing like a echo or something. Anyway, yeah, it's just sorry. I feel like everybody's like, give me an answer. Yeah, I mean, I guess in real life it's a lot less glamorous. It's a lot less cute. You can't really tie things up in a neat little bow and be done with it. And I feel like, yeah, there's definitely I agree with, you know, what Ben was saying, or there is definitely at this idea that we want to go back to the way things were during the Obama years or something. I just want to go back to the way things were. And I that's always such a slap in the face to hear to me, because for me, the further we go back, the worse things are for marginalized groups. And so it's just kind of like we're getting little morsels of progress that we can hold on to. So to backtrack would be awful. I think we're just getting to a place where people just aren't simply used to being uncomfortable, or at least the level of uncomfort that I feel like most Black people are just already used to. We're just already used to being at this level of uncomfortability, or instability of just like this all could just come crashing down at any moment. And I think white people need to reckon with that feeling and kind of just get over it. And I'm not really sure how that has anything to do with my comics. Well, actually it does, because I talk about these things in my work. And honestly, I try to make my work in just sharing stories and, and being radical in the way of just living a life. I touch on politics and I touch on the current events in some of my works, and in some of my works are just about just living my life. And I think that both of those things are important to see visually, and both of those things are important to understand, that Black people don't live in this constant state of trauma. One thing that's really annoying to me, when we watch movies, especially movies that have come out today, and there's been some screenshots that have been circling on the internet, from, I think it's called Enola Holmes. There's an actress from Chewing Gum that's in it, and she like has this quote in it about like, well, you don't have to pay attention to politics because you have the privilege not to, or whatever. And I'm just like, this is so corny. Like, stop putting Black characters and things to like have this moment of, the give the white character a conscience, and like everything that we think about in the 60s. We have these visions of the 60s where Black people just sat around and thought about the movement, versus like Black people also sat around and thought about their crush or their homework or the groceries or, family vacations, and just normalcy. And I think it's important to not always just, that's how I try to push my agenda, or at least my work, is just to let people just see Black people just living, and that we don't only, because I feel like there's this, white people need to be so involved in the Black people's lives that they need to be involved even in our pain. So we can't even just exist without them still being in the room, because we're talking about their oppression. And so that's kind of how I try to fight in my work, was just showing regular Black people. And in this longer form graphic novel that I'm working on, is about, poor Black kids like myself who grew up on the South Side, but had joy and loved music and hung out with their friends and were happy. And every day wasn't like, oh God, I go to an at-risk school and I'm gonna end up pregnant and drugs and gun violence. Like, I didn't think about those things. When I was in high school, I remember a girl pulled out a gun in her purse and was like, I'm gonna get my boyfriend after school. And I was like, okay. And then that was it, and that was just my life. Like, it was a little starter pistol. Like, it wasn't even, she kept it in one of those little Louis Vuitton baguette bags. It was just like, whatever, girl, do you, boo. And that was it. It wasn't, it's just, I'm tired of this constant, this like, we live in a war zone. Like, we don't, it's just craziness. I don't know. I'm not sure if any of that answered the question.
No, that was great. I mean, it says to me like that it's all in one big continuum for you, and that makes sense. Don't worry, you're good. Malaka, same question.
Well, Bianca, I really want to read that book. When is that coming out?
I have no idea.
Oh, I'm excited. I'm so excited. So Matt, I think your question was about what was your question? I just want to make sure.
It was more. What do you think like the relationship between the creativity in your career and like political engagement is? Like, is that like one big continuum to you, or is there a clear separation in you and your work, or even the work and the work?
It's really hard, because as a journalist at a major media company, like, I really, really, really cannot express any political views. It's very frustrating at a time like this. It's really frustrating because want to partake, and you can't even say that you want to partake. If you do choose to partake, you can't express that. So the way that I've tried to deal with all of my feelings, which I cannot disclose, is that I've tried to use my comics to be of service or to tell the stories of about other people. So during the big Black Lives Matter protests in Washington, D.C., one angle that I thought that I could be useful and help share maybe some of my knowledge working on the science desk at NPR was to go out on the streets and document how people were feeling about protesting during the pandemic for the NIB at that moment in time. Now it's not so big of a deal. Like, who cares? We're all protesting during the pandemic. But at the time, it seemed really, really novel. It was April. The idea of going out in the streets seemed dangerous. People were still in the lockdown. A lot of cities were in the middle of the lockdown. So just being able to, like, instead of putting the focus on me and how I feel, to put the focus on how other people and how they feel has made me feel like, even if I can't say my personal views, I can at least be a part of it somehow as a storyteller. And for my comics on science, again, trying to be of service to people. So trying to look for questions that people have. And for example, how do we take care of the older people that we love in our lives in the pandemic and make sure that their mental health is okay? How do we know that they're happy? How do we know that they're getting everything they need or not suffering from elder abuse? Other questions like, if you live in a place where people aren't wearing masks, like, how do you tell them to put on their masks? Like, using my comics to be of service to people has made me feel like I can be helpful.
You actually just went ahead and answered the individual question I had for you, which was about sort of like how heavy the separation of opinion and news is, and like, big serious capital J journalism like NPR. So I'm actually going to move into the part where I was going to ask people individual questions, but you just answered yours, which is good. But I want to go next to Bianca. So much of your work is like slice of life, and it manages to stay so readable and relatable despite having some heavy stuff in it. And like, what decisions creatively are you making or not making to try and keep that balance of like funny and pointed when you're making your work?
Ooh, let's see. I mean, I'm not sure if it's 100% intentional as much as I kind of wax and wane where I get to a point where I get exhausted and I'm like, okay, we need to change the vibes in here. It's getting a little heavy. Let's lighten it up. And it's really kind of, and then I get on my soapbox again and I talk about something and then I kind of go back to, and I think that's just kind of just life in general, that we have these moments where we have something where we need to say, and then we have these moments where we need to step back and listen. And I think that's just kind of reflective in my work as well. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. It's we all tend to get very exhausted talking about the same heavy stuff all the time. Ben, from reading your work, I know that you are no stranger to direct action in a lot of forms, from protest things that are a little spicier, we'll say. How do you feel that has affected how you approach your work? How do you feel that
Well, I guess the struggle I've always had is how to write about specifically sort of like anarchist activities, or like actually more sort of like formal or sort of like developing anarchist praxis when it comes to like broader ideas. Like I definitely had lots of time like reading lots of like really boring like French theory books that I don't think anyone should really bother reading, and none of it like really makes you an anarchist if you do read it. Like, I was an anarchist coming out of being confined for several years, and I hadn't even really heard of like Proudhon or whatever. So like for me, so there's that. And then also for me, it's like the way that like I guess, political participation outside of like an acquiescence or like complicity with, like the formalized state. It's really looked like kind of limited in the United States in a lot of ways. And I feel like most of the conversations I have are about like, okay, like what happens next, So for me, I think I like to write about things in a way that's like, this is cool, but also like trying to sort of aspire or sort of speculate on like what things could be. So, it's like I definitely could make a life in which I'm just sort of like, here's a 40-page comic on how to hang a banner, or, like here's a 40-page comic on how to like, discover your local fascist and have a spirited conversation with them. But those resources exist in other places, and I feel like what's missing a lot is sort of like a playful and sort of speculative sort of like conversation or discussion about like anarchism and just like how sort of like messy it is and how that's okay. But yeah, I mean, for me, like even though like I think I was gonna say that rights don't show up or don't account for like a huge part of my body of work, but I guess I literally put out a graphic novel that's about like street level conflict. But like they're really important to me. Like I don't think I would be a very good cartoonist if I wasn't like out in the outside, like out in the streets in the world on a regular basis. So yeah, and sometimes I'm gonna be honest, like I worry because I don't like to make terribly prescriptive comics. I worry that my comics will maybe seem remote and confusing to people who are feeling like who are maybe feeling like less engaged. Like I remember during Occupy, we had a bunch of people that showed up who had just spent a lot of time on forums talking about Occupy, and then showed up one day and they were like really confused. So, because like at the end of the day, like even with COVID, like someone else talked about it too, like eventually you gotta go outside and get in the mix. So I don't know. I was hoping for a punchy conclusion, but it's
all good.
That's what I got.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about prescriptivism, because like people, as someone who has to moderate the Nibs Instagram comments, or not moderate them, but read them occasionally. People do love to when you make a comic posing a problem or calling out an issue. People do love to say, "So what do we do about it?" It's like, I don't know. I got 4 panels, dog. I don't know what you want me to say here.
You go vote. That's what you do. You go vote.
Yeah, you don't. And then you vote. You wait until it's time to vote, and that's all you have to do.
That's it.
We can all agree on that. Okay. My next question here is: anyone can jump in, and feel free to talk amongst yourselves and respond to each other here. But what role do you see anybody, comics, playing in public debate generally?
What do you mean by public debate?
Like the discourse of the day. Like, what do you think?
I got you. Yeah.
What role does comics have there? Is it, do you see it as something reactive? Do you see it as something that should be more proactive? Do you think it should stay away? Like where do you see it like falling, and where do you try to position your work?
I mean, comics have become sort of such a casual medium today versus even 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and probably because we are in such a visual age with social media and comics sort of fitting so well within the realms of Instagram or Twitter. I almost kind of feel like sometimes people forget that they're reading comics. They feel like they're just kind of looking at a meme or just looking at some interesting infographic that's got illustrations and texts. that sometimes I feel like, sometimes, and that's maybe like a whole tangent for another day of my fear of what people are understanding comics to be, but outside of like it being something also like a literary agency, but I think it's both. I think comics both serve as a reaction and a call to action. And I've done work for both. As a lot of my reactive comics are sort of humorous, sort of one-liners, one panels, and a lot of my like call to actions are probably going to be longer form narratives. And for me, I mix more of like personal stories with a call to action to sort of humanize the action versus it being like a PSA. This is your brain on drugs sort of thing. I try to humanize the story and add a little bit of contextualize it. And so people can kind of place it somewhere, and just it's not just this thing I'm preaching at you. As someone who grew up in the church, my dad was a preacher, I'm a PK, like being yelled at and told like don't do this and don't do that just bounces off of my head, and I'm just like, okay, whatever. But to kind of be told to have a parable and have a longer story speaks to the heart. And I've said this before though, and I'm a firm believer in that like my oppressor has no conscience. So I'm not necessarily making work for white supremacists to read this and for them to like have some, Christopher Plummer moment where they rip their Confederate flag in half and realize that they're not a racist anymore. If that happened, somebody read my comic and that happened, that's great, but it's also like not my goal in life. If anything, I'm just sharing stories that just be as important as everybody else's stories. But yeah.
Malaka or Ben?
Sure. So the question was, can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. Like, where do you see? I thought the questions got minimized. Just simply, what role do you see comics playing in like public debate or discussions today around politics?
Well, I can talk about. This is the pandemic has become political, so
sure.
I've used my comics as a way to cope with a lot of the feelings. So, for example, after a lot of anti-mask rhetoric was, just in America, I guess, in general, I drew a comic for the New Yorker titled "How to Guilt People into Wearing a Face Mask." Mostly it was just like a chuckle for myself, like, this is so crazy, everybody should be wearing a face mask. But at the same time, it was also a reflection of a wider feeling that we have in our society, this frustration that we should be really, it's funny, but it has a deeper sentiment that we should all be wearing a freaking mask, put on your mask. So I've been using comics in that way, trying to like use it as a way to contextualize what is happening to us in all the realms. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. Oh, looks like Ben's back. I don't know if someone on the tech support side can help him out to get back in on the video. Sure. I mean, it's interesting. I think, Malaka, you've mentioned this a couple of times now, and it was actually one of my questions was, in general, do people find making inherently political work like a cathartic experience, or do you feel the opposite way? Like, I know sometimes personally, I feel almost like a sin eater, like having to pour through all these current events and sort of process it into something digestible. Yeah.
I could talk about not my 2020 experience, but my 2016 experience. I mean, in 2016, I used my comics as a way to correct stereotypes that I was seeing in the media about immigrants. So that was a place where I felt like my voice really mattered and could be heard and could change opinion. So in the political sphere at that time, there were a lot of anti-immigrant sentiments such as, immigrants are desperate to come here. They're coming here because of poverty and drugs. They're taking our jobs. Muslims are terrorists, etc. That was a place where I really felt like I was trying to course correct those narratives by drawing comics about my family and my upbringing in an immigrant community. So, for example, back then I drew a comic about my dad, the Muslim Egyptian American who America fears, and drew him kind of like Bianca, what you were saying, just in an everyday situation. He loves eating KFC. He loves gardening. He loves jorts, and he loves Tom Hanks. And
Who doesn't?
you know, and in a way, that was a way to. It was political then, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, Bianca, do you find it like a cathartic experience to talk about politics in your comics, or do you find it like exhausting? Or
I want to I don't know, it depends. Some days it's I don't cathartic is such a strong emotion to feel. I think it's more or less, sometimes it's just something I needed to say, something I needed to get off my chest, but I don't necessarily have any sort of higher, I don't think I feel like I've gone into a higher plane of feeling after finishing a political comic.
Yeah.
I think especially now, because I've been doing this for such a while, for a good minute, there is some days I do feel a little exhausted, which I think is why I've taken time to step back and work on my graphic novel and kind of just work on just moments of joy, which I think, I mean, and in that, I agree that it is political. It is a act of resistance, but there's, for me, it's definitely exhausting to feel like I've been repeating myself and folks are just now paying attention. I feel like I've been banging my head against the wall. So I feel the opposite of catharsis, of whatever the feeling you get from banging your head against the wall for so many years of your life, and people just being like, oh my, like, what is it? Like everybody's head's on fire recently because Trump didn't denounce white supremacy during the debate, and it's just kind of like, where have you been? Like, hello, like we've been trying to say, we've been screaming this for days, for years, before the man even took office. So it is there for me. There's definitely there's a feeling of frustration that I get sometimes, where I feel like I have an example. When the on May 26th, when the riots had picked up again, I just reposted a lot of my older comics that I've already drawn, because I was like, I'm not gonna redraw these same sentiments over again and exhaust myself, because I'm already at a place where I feel so incredibly exhausted. Just having just feeling like, what are we getting to? Like, what's going on? Why are you guys just like, what happened? Like, let's go, let's get to this next level, let's keep going, let's keep pushing. For me to keep telling the same story over and over again, I was like, the sentiment has been said. Let's keep moving forward. And like, I mean, like, and sometimes, it does, I do feel really good of telling a story. And a lot of times with my one panels, it does feel good to kind of just have like this moment where I can laugh at it. And again, like, humor, especially in the Black community as such, we use that for a healing through trauma. It's just something that we rely on. It's something that I need. Like, for me, making comics is an extension of my Blackness. It's an extension of just using humor to heal through what everybody else is doing at me. So I'm not sure if I feel cathartic as much as I just feel like a disgruntled, English teacher that's been doing this and has to teach Catcher in the Rye for the 10th year in a row. And I'm just like, let's get it, guys. Come on. Or To Kill a Mockingbird or something. Just like, come on. Like, we got this.
Yeah. Ben, I don't know if you heard the question, but I'm curious what you think here. Do you find making explicitly political comics or work, do you find it cathartic, or do you find it like hard or exhausting, or something you have to always find your motivation to do?
Can you hear me okay? Okay, cool. Well, I mean, I was thinking about it. I think that it's hard for me to make sort of comics that are sort of like explicitly political in like a cathartic way, because I don't experience the circumstances that would lead me to make something like that in like a necessarily like a explicitly like political way. You know what I mean? Like I don't like, you know, I don't get threatened by the cops and be like, oh man, can't wait to get home and rage a comment to my local council person about the necessity for body cameras. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So for me, like, I used to make like really weird, I mean, I guess I still do technically make sort of like weird sci-fi comics. And for me, that's like, you know, it deals with a certain kind of like existential woe, like a certain kind of intergenerational resentment, and that ends up being cathartic. I think the only thing that really makes me feel particularly satisfied when it comes to making like an explicitly political comic is when someone engages me on the comment that like, or engages me on the topic of the comic itself. Sorry. And that's cool. Lately, I've been trying to like engage with, you know, like older generations of Black revolutionaries, and those conversations through their like cooperation or collaboration have been leading to more comics. And that feels cool because it feels like I'm on a continuum of resistance and don't feel so isolated within just shit being bad all the time. And I don't know if that's catharsis, but it's sort of like, it feels better than just sort of me feeling away and then just like going in my room and for many hours and drawing about it. You know what I mean?
Sure. Like comics as a solidarity building program, almost, right? Like
Yeah, right.
The comic with the revolutionary you just did for the Nib was great. People should go look that up. What was his name again? I'm so sorry.
His name is Russell Maroon Shotes. He's dying of cancer in prison and really needs some money. So,
yeah.
So people should fill that commissary.
Yeah, no, that was a great interview, and he seems like a really fascinating guy. Cool. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so I want to check out. We got some comments, questions from the audience here. Yeah, here's a good one. Braden Lamb asks, is there a current topic that you want to cover in your comics that you haven't yet for some reason? Like it doesn't suit your voice or it's too heavy? Anybody can jump in there. Does that ever happen to anybody? Nobody.
I don't know if I'm silent. Yeah.
No, you're good.
Okay. There's been things, I don't know if it's like necessarily current, but there's things like things that I wish that I had more access to. Like I've been trying to learn Spanish better so that I can like do more interviews around like, you know, people that are suffering detention, like ICE raids, stuff like that. It's this huge thing that a lot of people write about, but I think in many years, people are going to look back at this time in America in many ways, but definitely in the way that people have been treating, you know, for lack of a better word, like immigrants. It's something that's like comparable to like, you know, you know, like I'm trying to think of something other than Nazi Germany, but that's what's coming to mind. Like it's so bad that I often feel like, why am I writing about anything else? Or why am I writing about anything else?
Yeah.
For me, the topic that I would like to try using comics for, part of my job at NPR is to report on global health and development, and that includes humanitarian crises. And I think that the world has really stopped caring about what's happening in Syria, in Gaza, in Yemen. There's a huge hunger crisis there right now. And one thing I'd like to try in my comics is to try to use this format to tell those stories. People stop clicking on the stories, you know, even if you publish an article about it, people don't necessarily read them, but maybe comics, because it's more accessible, it can be a kind of format where people may have more of a chance to listen. So I like to try that if I have time, not working on the pandemic full time, to do that.
Great. Let's see, we got one more time for maybe one more question. Let's see, yeah. Do you feel that your comics are geared more towards one group of people, or do you try to make it broader? Sorry. And do you find that, I mean, do you find the idea of having to make a comic for everybody, like insulting or narrow, or like, too narrow for you to worry about?
I'd like to answer that question.
Yeah, sure, please.
I always try to think about what I'm interested in, and I always draw comics like for me. So like even if it's like a public service article, it's always a question that I'm interested in myself. So how do I feel about how do I deal with somebody who doesn't want to wear a mask? How do I deal with the feelings that I have about not caring, being far away from my grandmother during this pandemic and not helping her? How do I feel about being isolated in this pandemic? Like, people, your experience is what I've learned from drawing comics. Your experience is like, you're not the only person who feels that way. There's so many people. That's the amazing thing about the comic community. Like, people read their comics and they're like, oh my gosh, same, me too. I had totally the same feeling. So like, trust in the way that you feel because there's something there.
Bianca or Ben? Oop, I think you're muted. There you go.
Yeah, I agree with the sentiment of drawing for myself, and it's the same thing I tell my students to make work for themselves and to not necessarily chase an audience, especially because I don't necessarily assume that my audience is always going to understand or know the frame of references that I may be talking about as a Black woman. They may not always get all of the ins and outs and the subtleties of my existence. And my hope is that there's less of a sense of voyeurism in my work, of kind of just coming over and reading it and then being like, oh, that's how nice for this Black person, and then walk away back to their white lives, but to again, just kind of see our existence as something that coexists along theirs and not necessarily something that they can place into a box that they don't have to think about once they turn their phone off or however they're consuming my work. But yeah, I mean, I write for other Black non-binary people, Black women, Black marginalized communities. I think Black people definitely are the first and foremost of my mind when I'm working, especially because I have always been a fan of comics since I was a kid. I think the first comics I read were probably, outside of newspaper comics, were probably like X-Men. And I just, when I started to go to the comic book store myself and, go to the back of the comic book store, I was always looking for myself and didn't see it, and got to a place where I really started to believe that the reason why I didn't see myself was because no one wanted it. Nobody wanted to see a Black woman in comics. Nobody cared to hear her story unless it was some disgusting comic drawn by Art Crumb. Like, it just wasn't important. So why would they make it? And so that's one of the reasons why I started making work, was to forge my path in there and to force my way in there. So for the next kid who's at the comic book store, who's looking for that work, they can see that work. And that's so important to me. It's so important. It's, just thinking, those, where those kids are, and how important it is to have that representation. And to feel like you matter. I think one thing that a lot of white people don't understand is just that feeling of seeing yourself is so important. And you guys have been able to see yourselves since, you can go see a Renaissance painting and see yourself. It's so important to have that in art and to make its place. And that's how my work is political. It's just like forcing that representation.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah. Ben, Just if you want to close us out, who do you make your work for?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
Oh, wait.
you're there. You're muted. Oh no. He's throwing his hands up. All right. Ben, if you could sign. Yeah, all right. I think it's 5 o'clock. I think we can wrap up. Thank you so much for taking the time, Ben, Malaka, Ben, and Bianca. Thanks everybody who came and watched. Thank you, Mice. So much. Yeah,
I have a quick outro for us.
Okay.
Yay!
Yeah.
Take me home, Zach.
Thank you everyone for coming, and
Oh, there we go. Goddamn.
Yo.
I can miss it.
All right. Thank you so much for coming and being patient with us. We really, really appreciate it. We know it's you know that we know that you know it's not easy, but nevertheless, thank you so much. To order our panelists' books from Paper Asylum, which is a local independent comic shop, please find links on our website by clicking the button at the bottom of your screen saying it says buy these books. This session is part of the Month of Mice, a month of free comics programming, including panel discussions and workshops. If you're interested in this topic, you may want to check out Democracy How! Civics and Comics next Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern. For a full list of sessions, visit micexpo.org. That's micexpo.org. And check out our fundraising raffle where you can win cool prizes like a tote bag full of comics from Drawn and Quarterly or a Wacom One tablet.
Ooh.
Oh, hold on.
I know. Check out Twitter. It's all there. Thank you again, everybody else. And we're going to close out this panel. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.